I never do podcasts. This is my first. I don't do interviews.
How do you think you're, by the way, how do you think you're doing so far? I like your background. It's very real.
I have Willie Mays over there. I mean,
Right.
it's simple. I don't even like going on other TV shows. They're always, I don't want to do Fox. I'll do Greg Gutfeld because he makes me laugh, but.
Our guest today on 13th and Park is Fox Business News host Elizabeth MacDonald, who has spent a career asking tough questions of those who are in power. MacDonald has built a reputation for cutting through the spin, whether it's on Wall Street, in Washington, or at the intersection of the two. She's covered market crashes, corporate scandals, and government overreach with one singular focus: how do they impact the rest of us? From Ballard Studios in the nation's capital, it's 13th and Park.
I never dreamed going into the White House you'd risk your freedom.
We in Congress will act together when we have to act.
They deserve better, and we owe them some results.
I believe this country's best days continue to remain ahead.
I had no idea the monster we unleashed.
I play every night, and people love it. They're going berserk.
Well, I don't have any Emmy Awards behind me yet, but,
I'm sure they're coming.
I'm so glad to be here on 13th and Park.
Liz MacDonald, great to have you on 13th and Park. I want to tell everybody we just had an off-camera conversation about books, and you have a book coming out this spring, a children's book that follows a book you wrote about a 15th century figure, right?
That's
so
right.
I'm trying to figure out, how do those pieces fit together? How do you go from like a serious piece of biography to a children's book that I think will inspire generations to come?
Well, they don't really track. They don't really follow. But, growing up, I just became really interested in the period Henry IV and V. Then I came across a woman who wrote, considered the first autobiography of Marjorie Kemp. So I studied Marjorie Kemp's story, and it was a fascinating window into England, 1373 to 1436, right? The period that I really enjoy reading about.
So this sounds like you have a very curious mind, right? Which is, I think, the most important thing to have in the days we now are living in terms of AI and technology kind of driving all sorts of knowledge at us. But it's only as good as your mind is curious enough to find it, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so what happened was, when I started reading about Marjorie Kemp, she is considered in England like the Hillary Clinton of saints. She's demanded to be a Catholic saint, and she's so annoying. She was kicked out of multiple pilgrimage parties around the world. And so then I looked at the story backwards, and I realized it's a real life Chaucer's Canterbury Tale. It's hilarious.
Right.
Local British people at the time were saying, Marjorie, you're so annoying. We should have left you in the middle of the harbor in a bottomless boat. Even Jesus' own mother didn't cry as much as you are for him, Marjorie. So then I just got into it, and it turns out I wrote a play off the book, and they showed it in England. And what was really cool is just to see that performed in the church that Marjorie went to. The church is built in 1180.
Obviously, you came into the field of journalism, having worked with the Wall Street Journal, with Forbes, and you developed a really keen reputation as a principled investigative journalist, they're referring to it as. What does that mean in today's world? How did that kind of school you in the way you go after a story? You try to understand a story. And most importantly, Liz, how you try to communicate that story to people that are hearing it for the first time.
I guess, let's start at the beginning. I grew up in a big family, a lot of firemen in the family. And my mother never knew her father. My grandfather died when she was 1. My grandmother was pregnant, 1932, middle of the Depression. So I remember just sitting with my mother, my grandmother, my Aunt Austine at the dining room table. And I know a lot of families out there, I hope they probably can relate to this. There's just this quiet grief that it's impenetrable. They were communicating with each other, but just sitting there quietly, not speaking. And I thought, why did they have to go through that? And then I wanted to be a reporter since I was 10. And I took a beat nobody wanted, and that was the IRS. I think there was only one New York Times reporter doing in halftime. And lo and behold, that beat within 10 years blew up.
Wow.
It was an underreported beat at that time, the IRS.
What do you think, Liz, in terms of your responsibility to the viewer? What do you really owe the viewer in terms of how you report, what you report? Do you feel that when you kind of get on set and a lot of people are watching Liz MacDonald and they're waiting to hear what your take is on something, but your responsibility is to make sure it's less about opinion and more about kind of just getting the facts out there and respecting people enough to allow them to figure out what to do about it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that, given that the grief that I saw with my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, and the question was always why. So for me, every show, I'm thinking why, and I'm thinking of the viewer sitting in the living room having a question. I want to be that person asking that question on camera. And so that's why, honestly, I never do podcasts. This is my first. I don't do interviews.
How do you think by the way, how do you think you're doing so far? I like your background. It's very real.
I got Willie Mays over there. I mean,
right.
simple. I don't even like going on other TV shows. They're always, I don't want to do Fox. I'll do Greg Gutfeld because he makes me laugh, but I forget the question. But, I just like to come in and do the work and just, hope we get it right. That's all.
Well, isn't all of business journalism changing very quickly? I can tell you personally, I love watching Fox Business to try to get more perspective on how the events of today are impacting real lives. And I think the economy, wherever you happen to live on earth, the economy is central to everything in everyone's life. And being able to kind of understand how world events and geopolitics, the Trump administration, how that impacts things is very important for people, probably more than ever.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it feels like there's such a barrage of information coming at people that they want people out there who've been doing the work for a long time, not just to be Walter Cronkite, here's the facts, but what do they think about it? And it is a perilous position for a reporter and journalist to be in, because you really do just want to report the facts. So, when covering the IRS, I just was sitting there and I would go into these congressional hearings. I'd be the only journalist in the back of the room, and the IRS agents would be like, "Oh, there's somebody here covering us," and test as they were testifying. So I would just sit and listen to them, and they're not some denatured, aclinical thing like a sewing machine. They're human beings caught in a brutal bureaucracy. I do have compassion for IRS people because the IRS has to deal with Congress fiddling neurotically with the tax code every other year. Mm-hmm. They're the ones dealing with it. They just want to be a tax collector. And you find a lot of stories coming to the IRS. A lot of stuff was given to me, leaked to me, because IRS officials, being human beings, didn't like what they were seeing. One of the only times my fingers froze at the keyboard was I was looking at JFK, and I was looking at the IRS, what was going on under JFK. And JFK at the time, just studying the period, he was, getting really criticized by the conservative right. So he puts his family accountant at the IRS named Carmine Bellino, and he oversaw the ideological special organizations. And that was going after 10,000 conservative groups just because they're conservative. And in doing the IRS coverage and going in and out of D.C., I call up Mortimer Kaplan. He was Kennedy's IRS commissioner. And this is when I was at the Wall Street Journal. I said, Mortimer, I see on the list you audited 10,000 conservative groups. So why are you auditing Daughters of Zion, Daughters of the American Revolution? He said right off the bat, we just didn't want to appear too partisan. And I thought, what? And so then I look down, I see some more like left of center groups audit. I call him back. He said, Liz, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, under Eisenhower got everybody audited. So I just put that in the story too. So I would sit in the IRS archives. It looks like the back room of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was just sitting there going through footnotes and stuff. My fingers froze at the keyboard. I was like, oh my God, the Kennedys were auditing Lee Harvey Oswald. They were auditing Lee Harvey Oswald's group.
You're saying that they were investigating Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination?
Yes, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was swept up in the ideological special organizations, nonprofit audits.
That may be a topic for your next book, Liz, to
Maybe.
tell you the truth. So you're going to bounce from 15th century to children back into Lee Harvey Oswald and the Kennedys, right? Let me ask you something. People are very curious. You came from print journalism, and now you're really broadcast journalism or digital journalism. How is that different? Is it the same?
It's different. Roger Ailes, who was so brilliant at Fox News, he was really so smart about what TV is. And it's a powerful medium. You're in someone's living room. So it's different that your physicality, your whole body is the message. And what TV does, it makes you a better writer. So the revered editor-in-chief of Forbes magazine, his name was Jim Michaels, and he covered the Kashmir Range for UPI. And he broke the news about Gandhi's assassination. I'm going to get you his mass card. Hang on one second. That's Jim Michaels. You go to a funeral and they give out mass cards, And there's usually like the Lord's
Sure.
prayer on the back. So this is Jim Michaels. This is what he gave out in the church at his wife did at the funeral. And the back reads, "Keep it short."
And of course, it was a 5-minute funeral. So, everyone kind of honored his wishes, right?
Right. But yeah, so it makes you a better writer. It makes you more focused. And in this day and age, when people are hit in a tornado of information, I think it's an important point to make that it's really tough for journalists not to fall into that dangerous zone of being called activists.
Right.
People are so smart. They're really smart and they catch everything. So, I just feel like in this day and age, if you're not just showing it, right, and just letting people see the information, you're not going to do well. That remote control is so brutal. People will turn the channel.
What is your advice to someone that's trying to get a handle on personal finances and the economy? What kinds of things can they do to kind of funnel what they're looking at to try to understand more what the bottom lines are potentially for them and their family?
So, I covered corporate accounting scandals for the Wall Street Journal. I did the first edge of, it was WorldCom. Bernie Ebbers mentioned me in a speech. He was mad at me a year before he got hauled off. Sendent, subprime mortgage crisis. Because I cover the accounting industry, they were telling me, warning about the subprime mortgage crisis. First of all, the dot-com blow up, we knew it was going to come. I knew it was coming in 97 because I was covering the SEC and sitting in on SEC meetings down in Washington with the accounting firms. And they were talking about it, 97, 98. And then, the dot-com bubble blew up. And then I started reporting on the subprime mortgage crisis in 1998 with the Wall Street Journal. We saw that coming. And that blew up, like 10 years later. Wall Street was just cooking the books. And the canary in the coal mine for that was the mortgage insurance companies and the bond insurers. But that's really too wonky. In terms of what people can do out there, it's really hard to find and trust people that you really want to read about. I tend to go to the Wall Street Journal. That's where I earn some stripes. It's hard to get past the veneer of somebody's ideology, even sometimes in market coverage.
That's it.
So what I tend to watch are the mid-caps S&P 400 Spider ETF, which is now hitting new highs, So that is a broad-based basket of stocks that tell you where the economy is directionally going. The broader indices, they're a basket, but they're driven by mostly tech. I like to look at a low-cost index fund ratios and looking at where they're doing.
There is kind of a square off, isn't there, Liz, today about what's moving numbers, what's moving the economy, what's moving business fortunes. On the one side, you have Washington government ideology, and on the other, you have the numbers, right? What are the numbers? But both of them are kind of in play. One's impacting the other, isn't it?
They are now. And, what we saw, and it was really startling starting the pandemic, it really was so remarkably easy for a politician to hit the gas pedal on, government spending and money printing. And Biden certainly did that. And so, of course, when you throw a lot of hot money into a lockdown economy, you're going to have inflation. And it was unfortunate that Jerome Powell, went along with that and endorsed that. But now it feels like the U.S. economy is going through a dialysis. There's kind of a chemotherapy of this excess of where it felt like the Obama-Biden administration were pushing the America to focus on what their policy is and hooking the U.S. into their DC policies or federal policies. Whereas now we're in reverse. It feels like that foot is off that pedal. And it's a heck of a Titanic ship turnaround 180 to do for the economy, but it's happening now.
Going back into your biography, I read about you once spent time working with Mother Teresa in Calcutta. She said, a life not lived for others is not a life. And then also said, if you judge people, you have no time to love them. Are some of the philosophical underpinnings of all of that underneath who you are as a person, much less as a broadcast evangelist, we'll call it, on Fox Business?
Yeah, I did think about joining. I did a come and see. I thought, this is in the 90s. Then I decided to go work at the Wall Street Journal. And I worked with Mother over in Calcutta. She would just come into a house and grab a mop and start mopping. It's really simple work. We can go out in the world, and when you're out in the world, you're of the world. But when you come home and you think about what Mother is saying and, what we're taught, it's very simple. Your mind can go hither and yon with who said what. But in 30,000-foot perspective, way up, it really doesn't matter, what anybody says.
So of all the things that are floating out there the housing market, inflation, the impacts of AI. What's the one you find most compelling and still has a long track to play out?
Why people suddenly become millionaires after they work in Congress. I find it stunning. I've been doing a lot of work on Ilhan Omar, just digging into the documents and trying to get the facts on what's going on there.
Because that's a story where apparently her spouse has done very well for himself.
Yeah, so it's a story where in 1 year she declared net worth of 16,000. Next year it rocketed up to 30 million. So I'm finding more shell companies, LLCs in his name. Now he could have started out with a business intent. How are all of a sudden they're venture capitalists in Washington? This same company owed about $404,000 in back taxes to Delaware and got their registration canceled. Why? If you're all of a sudden worth 25 million because of your investment firm, how come you just year prior owed back taxes? So there's a lot of questions. We don't see a business presence. We don't see clients. We don't see an internet presence. But it is concerning that she said 16,000 in her disclosures and then reported up to 30 million. Why? Within 1 year.
I'll tell you what I like about how you're describing this evolving story. You're putting the facts out there, Liz, and allowing me to try to figure out, okay, are you putting one and one together like I am, but you're not saying that. I think that's the difference between news and opinion. Yes, things aren't adding up. Maybe there's an explanation. I mean, probably need to be several explanations, but maybe there is. But the nice thing is, when I grew up with television news in the days of Walter Cronkite, et cetera, it was a very refreshing period where you just got the information and you got a sense of kind of goodness behind the information. And that's the other thing I really think that you bring to the table. There's a sense of authenticity about you that I think is important to be able to compel the people you're communicating with to say, okay, Liz said, this is what's going on. I can kind of take that to the bank. And to Roger Ailes' credit, who understood, the power of visual media, people can tell whether you're being straight or not, whether you're comfortable with what you're communicating or not. And that's pretty much when people draw the lines about how much they're willing to accept news as opposed to distrust it.
Yeah, that's right. People don't want to listen to, unless you have an axe to grind and you want to get your opinions confirmed, or do you just want information? Right? One story that really stayed with me emotionally was SeaWorld.
Okay.
They had all these orcas that were dying. The question was why? And so I looked at SeaWorld and they were cooking the books. So to me, what's infinitely more interesting is not someone's opinion. It's the answer to what's going on under the hood here. Why is this happening like this?
Right. So on your show, on the Evening Edit, of all the people you've interviewed and gone back and forth with, conversed with, which one stands out? Is there like an interview, a moment that kind of steeled your resolve that, you know what, I'm doing what I should be doing in life? As crazy as my life might seem to some who are tracing your book history from the 15th century to children and back, it actually makes sense. And it all kind of crystallized. Was there a moment like that, the aha moment for you where you said, I'm where I should be?
Anytime I watch Brandon Gill at House Oversight, he did it with Jack Smith recently, like a knife. He was just going through Jack Smith's argument and just bringing the receipts, covering the pandemic. We did our pandemic coverage out of a van in front of my apartment building here in New York City. And every other day we were getting hit with traffic tickets. But we started hearing from nurses and doctors that people were getting really sick from that COVID shot. And it's not a vaccine, it's a shot. I talked to so many nurses and all of them were saying, don't take the shot. There's something wrong with it. We saw people out on the street suddenly turn into bureaucrats telling other people how to live, that they must take the shot. You weren't allowed to question it. That to me was truly disturbing. Another crystallizing moment for me was watching Dr. Fauci. Mm-hmm. He was saying, you don't have to wear masks. Masks don't work. Wear masks, wear masks. You're shutting down the economy and you're throwing 22 million people out of work. How does shutting down a shoe repair guy or a dry cleaner? Why? How is that going to stop the pandemic? Why, guys? And you're letting the big box stores stay open. But the little guys have to shut down? To me, it's that coverage needed to be better. Instead of people bullying other people on camera to take the COVID shot and mandating it where healthcare workers, soldiers lost their jobs, lost their pension. To me, that is one of the biggest civil rights violations out there, along with letting 650,000 known convicted criminal illegal migrants crossed the border over the last 40 years. We talk to angel moms, we talk to angel dads, we talk to angel families. Routinely, I got to tell you, every last one of them said, we have never heard from a Democrat politician, period. Joe Biden didn't call them. Nobody in the Biden White House called them. No Democrat congressman would call them. I mean, the story of Josh Wilkerson, for example, his angel mom just lives with me to this day. So when I see the victims of crime and I see the media not reporting on it, I have to say, why? Are you being an activist or are you being a journalist?
When you take on convention, when you take on the prevailing mood, the public mood in a certain situation, as opposed to figuring out what's really going on, having the courage to go and investigate and figure out the truth of it, and then reporting whatever that is, as opposed to a society, I think, where we are more and more expecting to get the news quickly, to be able to make rapid judgments about what to make of a situation. Obviously, the Minneapolis situation is one of so many that come into that microscope. And yet, what we really want as Americans, we want the facts. We want the truth. Unfortunately, most of the media doesn't approach their profession, frankly, that way. I think you and others do, because not leaning in is an abdication of duty. But leaning on a situation with personal opinion is not informing people, it's inflaming people.
Yeah, that, right. So, for example, the ICE-involved shootings, Alex Preddy and Renee Good. So people are, why didn't he shoot out the tires? Well, you look at it, they're not trained to shoot out the tires. Why? Because they could risk shooting somebody else if they misfire.
Right.
So it's very difficult coverage. People are outraged by those two shootings. Nobody wants to see anybody shot dead in the streets of America. But at the same time, nobody wants to see a mother raped and murdered or a child sex trafficked, across the border either. You can see both of those in and of themselves with moral clarity as two distinct news events. And, you're not being anti-ICE to question it.
Right.
You're not being racist or anti-immigrant to report on the dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of people killed by violent criminals pouring across the border. And it is such profound heartache that those families have endured that. And it's not fair. And to me, that's a story. Why not cover their stories, right? Show what they went through. I just don't understand why the establishment media, why MS Now, why CNN, why they don't cover it. I don't get it.
Well, I think knowledge and information are power. And I think you provide that in the regular course of what you do every day, Liz. And I think the American people appreciate that because they've been harder pressed to find that kind of perspective, that kind of news source that they can say, okay, I learned something today. Now let me figure that out, right?
Can I leave you on a funny note?
Yeah.
So I was friends with the guy who at the New York City Fire Department who oversaw fire safety in skyscrapers. His name is Cesar Sansevero. He passed away. So this is my great-grandfather. He ran the New York City Fire Department. See his face with mustache?
Yeah.
He invented this nozzle called the Doherty distributor that went under the docks in turn of the 20th century. He joined in 1888 during the Great Blizzard. Cesar said to me, come over to the firehouse. We're going to do a thing for your grandfather because he worked for that 48th and 8th fire with him.
Right.
And I said, did this Doherty distributor nozzle work? He goes, no, it was a piece of... And I said, do they give out a medal in his... And so I used to do that in the intrepid, give out a medal. And Caesar would be like, yeah, they give out 100 million medals. Okay.
Well, Liz, I really appreciate the time you spent with us today. I wish you all the best. I hope you keep doing what you're doing, the way you're doing it, because I consider it a public service. When people in your position take it seriously enough and feel enough responsibility to try to get it right, and you respect people with the truth. And I think even though Mother Teresa's long passed, I think those lessons are alive and well in people like you.
I'm glad you didn't ask me how I accidentally high-fived her. She was trying to we were in her house in Calcutta. She was trying to put a blessing on my head.
And?
I accidentally high-fived her like an idiot.
I bet that high five will live with you forever, right?
And my family won't let me forget it. Neither will I.
Liz, go forth and conquer. Thank you so much for the time you spent with us today.
Okay, I'll see you.
Be good.